Battlefield 6, one of the most visually intense FPS titles out there, and today, I'm testing it on the legendary budget GPU, the GTX 1050 Ti, paired with the AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D. Everything here is running completely stock. No overclocks, no tweaks, just pure, raw gameplay captured using CapFrameX and Riva Tuner. Now, before we dive in, over 96% of you watching right now aren't subscribed. Let's flip that number. It takes one click, and it really helps the channel reach that 1,000 sub milestone. So hit like, drop a comment if you've ever gamed on a 1050 Ti, and of course, subscribe for more real-world benchmarks. All right, let's see what this old card can really do inside Battlefield 6. Pairing a 9800X3D, one of the best gaming CPUs in 2025, with a GTX 1050 Ti, a 2016 budget GPU, is like putting a jet engine in a go-kart. The CPU is ready for war, but the GPU is fighting for survival in Battlefield 6, a game built for modern hardware. At native 1080p, the 1050 Ti's 4 gigabytes of VRAM and aging architecture are severely overmatched, even at low settings. Here's what you're working with: 1080p overkill. At overkill settings, the GTX 1050 Ti crawls at 5 FPS. Not playable, but a testament to its struggle. The sheer weight of modern effects, ray tracing, high-res textures, and destruction physics crushes this GPU. The 9800X3D is barely breaking a sweat, but the 1050 Ti is on its knees, rendering one frame every 5 seconds. This is more of a stress test than a gaming experience. If you're seeing this, it's time to upgrade or accept that Battlefield 6 isn't happening on this GPU at these settings. 1080p high. Dropping to high settings bumps the frame rate to 7 FPS, still a slideshow, but the GPU gasps for air. The 9800X3D is waiting patiently, while the 1050 Ti struggles to push even basic effects and textures. At this point, visuals are irrelevant, the game is unplayable, but it shows just how far the 1050 Ti is from modern demands. Even older titles like Battlefield 1 would run better. 1080p low. At low settings, the 1050 Ti hits 9 FPS, technically higher, but still nowhere near playable. The game looks like a blurry, stuttering mess, with textures popping in and effects missing entirely. This card is clearly gasping, but let's see if some anti-aliasing magic helps or hurts next. With the GTX 1050 Ti already gasping for air at 5 FPS in Battlefield 6 at 1080p overkill, enabling anti-aliasing is like adding weights to a marathon runner mid-race. The 9800X3D is still waiting for a challenge, but the 1050 Ti is drowning in the sheer workload. Here's how TAA, FSR native AA, and XESS native AA affect performance. TAA, temporal anti-aliasing. TAA keeps the frame rate locked at 5 FPS, just like native rendering. The image looks smoother, jagged edges are reduced, and shimmering is minimized. But the performance hit is negligible because the GPU is already maxed out. At this point, TAA is purely a visual band-aid. It doesn't make the game playable, but it softens the pain of the slideshow experience. If you're forced to play at overkill, TAA is the least damaging option for the 1050 Ti. FSR native AA. FSR native AA actually boosts performance slightly to 6 FPS, a tiny but noticeable improvement. The image clarity is better than TAA, with less blur and sharper edges, but the frame rate is still unusable. This is the best-case scenario for anti-aliasing on the 1050 Ti, a minor FPS bump with decent visuals. If you're desperate for clarity, FSR native AA is the least harmful choice, but don't expect miracles. XESS native AA. XESS native AA is a disaster for the 1050 Ti, dropping performance to 4 FPS. While the image is sharper than TAA or FSR, the performance cost is brutal. This GPU lacks the architecture to handle XESS efficiently. The 1050 Ti clearly isn't built to handle Battlefield's modern AA tech. With the GTX 1050 Ti already struggling to render Battlefield 6 at 1080p overkill, upscalers like FSR and XESS are supposed to be the lifeline. But in this case, they're more like a bandage on a broken leg. The 9800X3D is still barely breaking a sweat, but the 1050 Ti's ancient architecture and lack of dedicated upscaling hardware mean these technologies can't work their magic. Here's the brutal truth: FSR upscaling. FSR upscaling drops the frame rate to 4 FPS, worse than native rendering. The upscaling process itself adds overhead that the 1050 Ti can't handle, negating any potential performance gains. The visuals are slightly more stable, but the game is still a slideshow. FSR is designed for modern GPUs on the 1050 Ti. It's just another layer of struggle. XESS upscaling. XESS upscaling performs identically to FSR, also hitting 4 FPS. Like FSR, XESS relies on AI and modern GPU features that the 1050 Ti simply lacks. The image might look a tiny bit sharper, but the performance cost is the same. XeSS is another technology that doesn't play nice with this aging GPU. This is pure brute force rendering at its limit. After every other trick failed, FSR frame generation is the final Hail Mary for the GTX 1050 Ti in Battlefield 6. This is where AMD's magic tries to generate extra frames and salvage playability, but even Miracle Tech has its limits. Here's the result: FSR frame generation. With FSR frame generation, the 1050 Ti jumps to 8 FPS, nearly double the 4 to 5 FPS it was getting before. On paper, this is the biggest improvement of the entire test, proving that frame generation can help even on ancient hardware. But here's the catch: frame pacing is inconsistent, making the game feel more like 6-7 FPS in motion. Latency is high, so inputs feel sluggish, critical in a fast-paced shooter. Visual artifacts, ghosting, blurring are more noticeable due to the 1050 Ti's lack of modern rendering features. Is it playable? No. But it's the closest we've gotten to something resembling gameplay on this setup. So, while the boost is measurable, it's nowhere near the smooth Battlefield experience we want. So, is the GTX 1050 Ti enough for Battlefield 6 in 2025? Realistically, no. Even at 1080p low, we're stuck below 10 FPS. The card's 4 GB VRAM buffer just can't keep up with today's high-fidelity assets, particle effects, and lighting systems. Still, it's impressive that the 1050 Ti can even launch the game, a true testament to how far this GPU has come since 2016. If you're rocking one of these, you might want to stick to older Battlefield titles or wait for an upgrade. If you found this helpful or just enjoyed watching the 1050 Ti fight for its life, hit like, drop a comment, and make sure you're subscribed. We're pushing hard for that 1K milestone, and every click really helps. You are watching the Best Ever PC Benchmark channel, and this was Battlefield 6 on the GTX 1050 Ti. See you in the next benchmark!